Welcome to Lesson 7 of the topic Matter 2. The title for this lesson is Making Compounds, and the question for this lesson is how do you make magnesium oxide? The key words for this lesson are atom, element, ion, metal, non-metal, and ionic bonding. First of all, we have a knowledge check to complete, so make sure that you pause the video and give yourself enough time to answer all 8 questions before the answers appear. Here are the answers. So the reason why atoms become ions is because they have an incomplete outer shell, so they need to gain or lose electrons to get a full outer shell. When they get a full outer shell, they become stable. That is what they want to do. The relationship between protons and electrons is that in an atom there are the same number of each. In atoms they have the same amount of protons and electrons, therefore the same amount of positive charge and negative charge, which means that overall they have no charge, they are neutral. The force that binds oppositely charged ions together is electrostatic forces. These form ionic bonds. The reason why metals lose their valence electrons is because they only have a few valence electrons, so it is easier for them to lose these few than gain lots to try and fill out that shell. So they are much happier with losing those few electrons and having the next shell down to be their new full outer shell. The charge of metal ions is positive. This is because they lose electrons, electrons being negatively charged, so they're left with more positive charge. The type of bond between two oppositely charged ions, it's already been mentioned, they are ionic bonds. And the charge of non-metal ions is negative because they gain electrons. This means that they get more of that negative charge, so overall they are negative. Make sure that you mark your work, give yourself a mark out of 8, and make any corrections that you need to in a different coloured pen. Now today we are going back to compounds. We did have a look a little bit at reactions last lesson, and obviously reactions are how compounds are formed, but you can also have reactions where you have a compound already and you're then making a different compound. So we can make compounds by chemically bonding 2 or more different elements together. This is done in a chemical reaction. Now if we know the names of the elements, we can name the compound. So the name of a compound is made from the names of the elements. Now atoms will lose or gain electrons in order to possess a full outer shell. They want to get a full outer shell, so atoms gain or lose electrons to do this, so they turn into either positive ions or negative ions depending on if they are metal or non-metal. We know that 2 oppositely charged ions become attracted to each other by electrostatic force. We call this an ionic bond. So an ionic bond forms between the 2 oppositely charged ions and they become an ionic compound. Now in the reactions that we look at today, you won't see it, but the atoms involved in the different elements turn into ions by losing or gaining electrons. They then become attracted to each other and form an ionic bond between them, making a compound. So you don't see this process, but it's happening. So today we are going to look at magnesium reacting with oxygen. So when magnesium metal is heated in a Bunsen flame, the heat energy causes the metal atoms to lose 2 of their valence electrons. It's the heat energy that gives the metal the prompt to lose its electrons. At the same time, oxygen atoms from the air, so the oxygen is in the air, they will then gain those 2 electrons from the magnesium. So this is what is happening during the reaction. The magnesium is being heated and it will lose 2 valence electrons. Oxygen in the air will then gain those 2 electrons. As we know, magnesium being a metal becomes a positive ion, whereas oxygen, which is a non-metal, forms a negative ion. Because opposite charges attract, and they are opposite charges, the ions are attracted to each other, they form an ionic bond, and therefore we make a compound, and that compound is called magnesium oxide. Remember that we get the name of the compound from the elements, so magnesium and oxygen, but oxygen becomes an ion, which would then be oxide. So when oxygen becomes an ion, it becomes an oxide ion, which is then in the name of the compound. So when it comes to making magnesium oxide, magnesium is a metal element. It exists as a solid at room temperature. So in the video of the reaction that you'll see that magnesium is a solid and oxygen is then a gas at room temperatures in the air. Now, magnesium will not react with oxygen until we supply the energy that's from heating the magnesium, which will cause the magnesium atom to lose the electrons, and the oxygen atom then gains these electrons, forming magnesium and oxide ions, which are attracted to each other because they are opposite charges. So it's all because magnesium wants to lose its electrons, oxygen wants to gain electrons. Because of that, it's easy for them to react together. Once they become ions, they are then attracted to each other, and that's when they form a compound. So we're going to quickly look at the method before we watch the video, just so that we know what's going to happen. So the first thing that you need is a Bunsen burner. You need to heat up the magnesium. Now I have a feeling that in the video they don't actually use a Bunsen burner. I think they use something else just to heat the magnesium. I think it might be a match possibly. But you need to supply that heat energy in order for magnesium to react with oxygen. Now when it's in the flame, normally you'd put it at the hottest part of the flame, and that then means that the magnesium will ignite very fast. Now if you are using this method, you need to remove it from the flame and allow it to burn in the air. This then allows the magnesium to react with the oxygen. The oxygen is in the air. And then all you need to do after that is just observe the magnesium oxide that's produced. So what I want you to do is watch the video in terms of the reaction, and what you need to do is you need to be noting down your observations in this table. So the appearance of magnesium metal, and then compare that with the appearance of magnesium oxide. Make sure that you pause this video before you go and watch this one, and then you can come back. So the thing that you should have noticed is that magnesium metal, being a metal, is silver grey colour. It's hard / tough, so it's not brittle, it doesn't break that easily, and it's quite shiny. These are common properties of metals. You should already know these kind of things. whereas magnesium oxide, the compound, is white, crusty / brittle, so it'll break quite easily. It kind of crumbles, and it's quite dull as well. These then are properties of non-metals. So you can see how the reactant appearance is much different to then the product appearance. Make sure that you mark your answers. You can add in anything that you need to. So, because we already know that we are watching magnesium and oxygen react to form a compound, hopefully you can fill out this part of the worksheet. Have a go at answering them. You don't obviously have to have this kind of setup. You can just write in the answers in terms of like just in a notebook or on a page. But all you need to write is then the word equation, the formula for each ion, and you can use your periodic table to help you complete that. You then need to write the chemical equation for this word equation. So in here we use words, so we're saying what the elements or compounds are, but in here we need to use the symbols. So have a go, see if you can fill it in, and then we will go through the answers. So for this reaction, we have magnesium reacting with oxygen, and it forms magnesium oxide. Remember that when we have the name of the compound, we use the names of the elements, the ions specifically, to name the compound. So the metal is always first, which is magnesium, and then the non-metal ion last. Now, when we write down the ion formulas, we need to make sure that we have the symbols and the charges. So our magnesium ion is Mg2+, so it has a charge of +2. The oxide ion is O, must be a capital O as well, with a 2-. Remember that we call these, the way that we write these, as superscript. It just means that it's above in small. So we need to make sure that we're writing these formula for the ions correctly. Last of all then, we have the chemical equation. So the symbol for magnesium is Mg. The symbol for oxygen is O, but oxygen always comes in pairs, so they're always together. And then our product is magnesium oxide, which is MgO. Make sure that you mark your work, make any corrections that you need to in a different coloured pen. So, when it comes to reactions, so during a chemical reaction, the number of atoms in the reactants must be equal to the number of atoms in the products. So there must be the same amount of atoms on each side of the arrow to make sure that it's equal. Because a chemical reaction is just rearranging the atoms, it's not adding any more, it's not creating more or getting rid of any. It's the same amount of atoms. It's similar to energy, how when we have energy and it's transferred to a different type, it's the same amount, it's just transferred to a different place or a different type. It's similar to that. So in terms of reactions, the amount of atoms needs to be the same on each side of the arrow. Now if you have a look at the reaction that we've written down, we have 1 atom of Mg, magnesium here, we have 2 atoms of oxygen here, and then we have, on this side of the arrow, we've got 1 atom of magnesium here, which checks out, so we have 1 each on each side of the arrow. But in terms of oxygen, we've only got one oxygen atom in the products. So we have two oxygen atoms in the reactants, but only one in the products. Therefore, we can call this equation unbalanced. Because there's more atoms on this side than this side, we can call it unbalanced. So to make sure that we have equal numbers of each atom on each side of the arrow, we need to add atoms until they become balanced. Now note that you are not expected to know how to do this at the moment, but you should be able to identify a reaction that is unbalanced. So you need to be able to look at this equation, think, oh, we've got two atoms of oxygen here, but only one here. That means it's unbalanced. So you need to make sure that you are able to identify whether a reaction is balanced or unbalanced. Now, to help us know how to balance the equation below, I have included then a video which goes through step by step how to balance the equation. So make a note in your booklet of how it has become balanced and the steps that is taken in this video in order to balance the equation. Make sure that you pause this video and then come back. The last thing that we need to do is we have a practical summary. So using what we've spoken about and the videos, we need to answer a few questions about the reaction that has happened between magnesium and oxygen. And then we have a knowledge check to complete, so 8 questions. So make sure that you pause the video and give yourself enough time to try and answer all 11 questions before the answers appear. So in terms of the practical summary questions, for number 1, we've got explain why only one magnesium ion and one oxide ion join together to form magnesium oxide. It is because magnesium has a charge of 2+, and an oxide ion has a charge of 2-. Because the charges are equal amounts, only one is needed of each one to make sure that the compound is neutral charge. If, for example, magnesium was still 2+, but oxide ion had only one negative charge, -1 charge, then we would need 2 oxide ions to make up that -2 charge to balance it out. But at the moment they're already balanced, they're already equal, so the compound magnesium oxide as MgO, just one ion of each, it forms a neutral charge. Question 2, explain how you know a chemical reaction took place in your experiment with magnesium and oxygen. The signs that a reaction occurred, so think about the video and your table, there was a change in appearance between the reactants and product, which shows you that a new chemical was formed. They have different properties, which shows you that it's a different chemical. Furthermore, when we obviously heated the magnesium, there was energy being produced in the form of light and heat, and that then shows you that a reaction took place. Now, when it comes to the chemical formula for the reaction between magnesium and chlorine, we need to have a look at the ions. So we have here magnesium, and we have chlorine. Because chlorine has only a -1 charge and magnesium has a 2+ charge, we need 2 chloride ions to make up that -2 charge to make sure that that compound is neutral. As you can see in terms of the equation, Because we've got 2 atoms on this side, we then also need 2 atoms on this side. And funnily enough, chlorine, just like oxygen, is diatomic, which means that atoms come in pairs. Like oxygen, O2, we always have O2. Chlorine is the same, so chlorine you can find in pairs as well, which then makes the equation balanced. Okay, so that's something that we need to remember for future lessons, because the next 2 lessons that we are going to do, you're going to be looking at reactions, and we need to remember what balanced equations or unbalanced equations look like, how to tell if they are balanced or not. Now, in terms of the knowledge check, when 2 different elements chemically bond, they form a compound. Atoms lose or gain electrons because they have an incomplete outer shell, so they need to gain or lose electrons in order to complete that shell. In terms of the unreactive group of elements, it is group 0, which are the noble gases. Non-metal elements become negative ions. The force that joins oppositely charged ions is electrostatic forces, and they of course then form ionic bonds. The chemicals at the start of a reaction are called the reactants. The ones at the end are called the products. Metals become positive ions because they lose electrons. The reason that non-metals become negative ions is because they gain electrons. And the compound made from the reaction between magnesium and oxygen, that's the reaction that we've looked at today, is magnesium oxide. Make sure that you mark your work, make any corrections that you need to in a different coloured pen. That is the end of the lesson. Thank you.